Revived Thoughts is a production of Revive Studios.
This is Troy and Joel, and you are listening to Revive Thoughts.
He used to go up and down the land of Israel, teaching people how to serve God and reproving sinners. In some places, he kept up schools called Schools of the Prophets.
Every episode, we bring you a different voice from history and a sermon that they delivered. Today's sermon was preached by J.C. Ryle, somewhere between 1841 and 1844 in Suffolk.
Yeah, everyone's been around Suffolk at some point. I mean, I've never personally been there, but I imagine people know where that is.
I don't know where Suffolk is. Where is Suffolk?
I know where London is. If you pull up a map of England, I can point to London-ish. I got an idea, and then everything else, no idea. Derbyshire, Suffolk, other places that have England-sounding names. I'm so sorry, English people, but I've never been there, so I didn't.
Well, you mean you ask your average Brit to point out, Denver on a map, they probably
as I say, point out Arizona. I bet they would struggle. So it's fair. Then again, I think a lot of us would struggle to find Arizona on a map. Sorry, Arizona listeners. I think I could do it, but I'm not 100%.
I was good at geography. I can nail it.
Yeah. All right, Joel, this is a special, very nice episode that we have today. We mentioned a few months ago, over the summer, we got an email from a listener, if you recall. If you don't, go back, listen to some episodes. But we had a very special episode from a young listener named Mordechai, and he really enjoyed our show. And he told us that he was hoping he could read a sermon for us someday. And it kind of, I think it felt like, I got the impression from him, he was very excited to read one. Why wait? So this sermon we have today is going to be read by Mr. Mordechai, this younger listener that we have. He did, I think, a fantastic job. And it is a children's sermon. So this was a sermon by J.C. Ryle that he would give to children, that he would aim at the younger people in his audience. And I think all of this is great. I couldn't be more excited about it. I think it's really cool. And so for this episode, I kind of wanted to just do a little refresher. It has been a long time since, I think it's been years since we've had J.C. Ryle episode and sermon. He's a fantastic preacher. So well worth our time to go back. But I also really just, of all the people we've had in the show, it was, I don't think it was quite a coincidence, but I think it was a good choice that J.C. Ryle was the one that they chose, because he actually does have a significant focus on children. And I could find a lot of just how important it was to him to bring the gospel to young people in a way that I actually don't think is true for every, I'm not saying that a lot of the pastors we feature in our show didn't care about the kids in their congregation. I'm sure they did, but we can see it with J.C. Ryle. Like, I can point to hard evidence and say, look at these things he did to make sure young people knew the Lord.
Yeah, did you mention, Troy, 10 years old? Mordecai is 10 years old?
Yeah, a nice young man. Same age as my daughter, and I got to be honest with you, my daughter is not yet ready to listen to these older episodes of Revive Thoughts, and she does love the stories of church history. She likes talking about that stuff. We read some of these books and stuff to her, but I don't think she could quite keep with the sermons. I don't think she'd be quite ready. So I'm impressed. Mordecai has impressed me that he's keeping up. He's going strong and ready to read his own.
Very impressive, and certainly a new record for our youngest narrator for Revive Thoughts. And he was the one that suggested J.C. Ryle. Is that correct too?
Yeah, it's from what I can tell. I believe I would imagine he may have had help from his family, but they're the ones who brought this sermon to us and said, "Hey, look, we found some children's sermons by J.C. Ryle. What do you think?" And I love it. Let's do it. Absolutely. And honestly, too, I will say, once in a while, we do have a listener that, even outside of the specialness of Mordecai here, but we'll have a listener say, "Hey, I found this sermon. What do you think about reading it?" And man, I don't think I've ever turned one down. I mean, I could imagine turning one down. If you bring me a sermon by Joseph Smith or something, I'll probably be like, no, thank you. That's not our show. But 99% of the time, I'm probably going to be like, yes, awesome. Let's bring it on. I love when people find these great sermons from history on their own and say, hey, let's bring this to life together. So again, all the things you could possibly want coming together here.
Yeah, a true revived Thoughtian. We need to come up with a better name for our listeners. Like what's a cooler name?
I like to call them historians or cool people, but I don't Now that I think about it, we've never actually come up with a name for you, because you who are listening right now, you were just always you to me. I didn't give you a name.
Well, I'm just saying, like, we get
at one
we
point
get
it was Eric with
that,
a K, but that's outside a very obscure reference from an earlier episode there.
Very old inside joke. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. We have people like this that are now, like, though, engaging and submitting sermons that they want to read. Like, there's a
Revivers. That's right there.
Revivers.
Let's go. How did we miss that?
Other fellow revivers. That's great.
Love it.
All right, J.C. Ryle. I know you've long since forgotten about him. Let's do our 30-second elevator pitch to catch us up to speed on the lay of the land. Born in the year 1816 and would die in the year 1900. And again, we're in the UK here, so lived a relatively long life. When he was younger, he went to Oxford at a very young age. So this is another example of our genius category. He's just a smart kid. He was a quick learner. He was a good learner. Had a great education, and he has this account upon hearing the gospel at a church. He was at a church service. He heard Ephesians 2:8, for by grace you have been saved through faith. It is not of your own doing. It is a gift of God. He heard that verse, and by his own account, he says he was instantly converted. So that there was something that clicked, that switch just flipped in his brain, and he understood the gospel, and it changed his life.
Yeah, and I will say too, and I remember the first time we covered J.C. Ryle, I found one source kind of saying like, I think it was like he was coming into church, like he hadn't even sat down, just like the pastor was warming up the sermon and said that verse, and it was like he was being converted as he sat down. I don't know if that's true. Since then, I've never found that, like, where that source came from, so I can't confirm it, but that's always hit me as like, man, that's kind of if it was like that, wow, what a powerful moment from God. Like, he hadn't even gotten in the pew yet, and the Lord was already doing the work. But again, I've never been able to confirm it or find that source again, so I don't know if it was actually quite like that.
Yeah, but I mean, regardless, by his account, he seems to have a regenerative moment that changes the trajectory of his life there, because he was planning on going into government and kind of making a name for himself in politics. He was wealthy. He came from a family of wealthy bankers, but again, it kind of went in a different direction. Shortly after being saved, his family would go into some hard times with their fortunes, with their monies. It kind of fall apart, and his family would have to declare bankruptcy. All of these things kind of combining. It's interesting how the Lord works, where he can kind of stage things to put you on a trajectory for life. And this is a moment that Ryle specifically calls out and looks back to, and he says, I don't know if my life would have been the same if my family didn't go bankrupt at this moment. Like, that was something that he believed, and I think is fair to assume that the Lord was using the Lord was in that, because he doesn't think, J.C. Ryle doesn't think that he would serve God in the same way he would have if he still had access to, those fortunes and those riches in that way. It would have pulled him in a different direction, or not been as easy for him, So I think that combination of him becoming a believer and needing to rely on the Lord kind of in this same swath was important to him. Ryle had misfortunes with his family life. He would end up getting married 3 times because 2 of his wives would pass away very young, leaving him with 4 children that he was a single father to. Married one wife. I think he had 2 kids with each wife. She'd pass away. Married again. That one passed away, and then he eventually would marry a 3rd one. Who did we just do that had the exact same marriage? Do you know what I'm talking about, Troy?
No, I definitely do. And you're definitely right. In the last couple episodes, we had another guy who had 3 different wives. And it's killing me that I can't answer that off the top of my head on you all of a sudden. And
Commenter.
Matthew Henry.
Matthew Henry. Yeah, Matthew Henry had the exact same situation where he had 2 wives pass away.
Which, by the way, Matthew Henry was obviously extremely recent version of that. But it is not an uncommon story in history. I mean, really, honestly, when we did our Now and Then episode, Things That Have Changed, that actually could have been its own section, how much marriage has changed, and how the idea of, like, we're getting married and we're going to be, most likely married for 50 or 60 years I mean, historically speaking, that happened a lot, but it also didn't. And a lot of people would have multiple wives follow, or, I imagine the women would also marry multiple husbands at times, and they did. That was a pretty common thing. And that's actually something I've never really gotten used to in doing Revive Thoughts for over 6.5 years. Just how many of these guys lost a spouse or two and lost children. Like, it is just something devastating that they just live with. It doesn't even come up that much. And I don't know. It is very different than how we live today.
Definitely a testament to modern medicine and childbirth in general. Like the fact that this would go to, you had like, I don't know what the percentage are. It seems like, based on our show, you had like a 30-40% chance of dying with complications around childbirth back then, where nowadays it's relatively a safe and normal procedure. And women actually have a longer life expectancy than men. Women went from having a very much shorter life expectancy to nowadays men are more likely to do something stupid and get yourself killed before your wife actually dies. So definitely,
I will say too, if you think it's pretty wild here on Revive Thoughts, I'm looking at a poster we have here hanging up of martyrs and missionaries, and I'm like, it's even worse over there. Like in Elisa's show, I feel like every famous guy who was a missionary lost his wife on the field, or like several kids. Hudson Taylor, William Carey, like all of the big names had to go through that at one point, and it is something that we don't have that same level of experience. It's something that thankfully our pastors are not just going through, and we're not all just going through loved ones that same level of Ryle did a lot of important work in his life. He criticized ritualism in the Church of England at the time, which had become quite common, where people would just do things because they believed the ritual of it had a power, things like that. It wasn't no longer about the kind of personal relationship. It was just do this. And he also did a ton to help the poor. We've talked about some of just the amazing work he did in his part of England. We've also talked about the sermons, how they've been read for years. I can tell you there are several large pages and books and YouTube channels just dedicated to J.C. Ryle's sermons. In fact, outside of Charles Spurgeon, I think he's probably one of the biggest names in sermons, outside of him, in terms of current internet clout. We can expect people that will tune into an episode with him. But today we're focusing on his teaching for young people. After all, like I said, a sermon we're listening to that is aimed at young people, that's being preached to. I think only one other time in all of our research of episodes have I ever seen somebody really take a time to focus on the young people that I can think of, and that was actually a sermon episode we did with B.B. Warfield. The sermon wasn't for young people, but I mentioned he wrote a bunch of books and stuff like that for them. This started very early in his ministry. We mentioned that this sermon was preached between 1841 and 1844. That would have been right at the beginning of his ministry, right when he first started working at a church. And you can just see from the very beginning, bringing the children in and reaching them for the gospel was just this very important part of what he was doing. And I think that's really cool because, so many pastors, when they're getting going, they're just trying to kind of get their legs under them. It's so common in the church today, and I think in the world today, that the young people are kind of brushed aside or forgotten or not brought in or not focused on. Or their problems can be kind of swept by as it's not as big a deal. They're young, blah, 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 blah. And it's really just cool to see how much J.C. Ryle wasn't going to do that, and how much he saw young people as absolutely precious, and their souls are extremely important. And you know what? Maybe I'm saying some of this because I'm a teacher, and I think the kids that I teach are great, and I worry about their souls, and I want to reach them as well. But I just think it's really cool. I think it's a humbling thing to see. You hear all these big names in the world today, and I think of just some of the kind of sometimes it's called celebrity pastor or whatever. And I think a lot of them are really great guys, but I don't feel like I hear as many stories of them trying to reach young people as I feel like I would like to. I would like to see more of this kind of J.C. Ryle energy of let's get the youth and the young people, because they're so important. And so anyway, it's a big deal. We often see young people, like I said, kind of push to the side. And one more thing to add to that too, worldview is so important, and what you believe is shaped at such a young age that the work of a pastor to reach those young people really, really is like, it is essential. And so I hope that if you are in ministry, or if you are hoping to be in ministry someday, if you are going to seminary, you're listening to this show from, any of those kinds of places, or you just volunteer at your church, I really do hope you're taking time to mentor or look after or volunteer or disciple, do something for these younger people that you have, because maybe you're intimidated, or maybe it's not something you're comfortable with, but man, they do really need it.
This went beyond just teaching them in Sunday school. He also wrote a book called The Duty of Parents, and it was on how to raise children to follow God. And it was based on the text to train up your child, like we see in the scriptures there. So he gave us 17 different lessons for training up your child. For example, a theme that runs throughout the book is he recommends using grace with children regularly, because grace softens up hearts just as it softens our hearts up to God, was what he said. And one of the lessons here that I'm going to read an excerpt from. So this comes from lesson number 4, again, 4 out of 17. He says, quote, "Train with this thought continually before your eyes that the soul of your child is the first thing to be considered. Precious, no doubt, are these little ones in your eyes, but if you love them, think often of their souls. No interests should weigh with you so much as their eternal interests. No part of them should be so dear to you as the part to which will never die. The world, in all of its glory, shall pass away. The hills shall melt, the heavens shall be wrapped together as a scroll, the sun shall cease to shine, but the spirit which dwells in those little ones, whom you love so well, shall outlive them all. Whether in happiness or in misery, will depend on you." End quote. So very poetic, a little bit, he's cutting to the point. He's a little bit direct there.
Yeah.
More
and
direct than we usually speak, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that too, because I think in like parenting today, if you look up parenting advice, Christian parenting advice, so much of it's about discipline, how to deal with children, all these different things. And those things are all, I'm not saying they're not important. Of course, we want to discipline and treat our children in the right way and all that kind of stuff. But I love that he's just like, one of his very first points is like, don't forget the soul, which is the actually most important thing. And I certainly could not agree with him more on that. Another one, he says, "Parents, I beg you, for your children's sake, beware of overindulgence. I call on you to remember it is your first duty to consult their real interests and not their fancies and likings, to train them, not to humor them, to profit them, not merely to please them. You must not give way to every wish and every desire of your child's mind, however much you may love him. You must not let him suppose his will is to be everything, and that he has only to desire a thing and it will be done. Do not, I pray you, make your children idols, lest God should take them away from you and break your idol just to convince you of your own folly." I really like that one because I'll be honest, I feel like even today, 200 years later, that's good reminding advice to people. It's so easy to please the kid. Just let them be happy. They'll stop crying. They'll stop this. And I think a lot of us will suffer if we do that. But it's nice to see that 200 years ago, they were dealing with the same temptation of just give the kid what he wants so he's happy. And we all know that doesn't work. And it's, it's not easy to do the right thing there, but it's nice to see that this has always been a problem. It's easy to think maybe like, oh, in the modern age, these kids are more spoiled. Nope. 200 years ago, we were writing the same advice. Don't just give them whatever they want. You love them. It feels easy, but it doesn't actually work. Here's another one. Learn to say no to your children. Show them that you are able to refuse whatever you think is not fit for them. Show them that you are ready to punish the disobedience, and that when you speak of punishment, you're not only ready to threaten it, but you will perform it. But do not threaten it too much. And these lessons, this parenting book was written by a dad who at different times was a single dad because these children had lost their mom. And he had, at one point, he would have 4 children in the home and no mother. He was, the sole provider for those children. I'm sure he had family or people nearby helping him out. I don't think he was completely all alone out there, but it still just kind of tells you what he was going through. So this is parenting advice, not from like an academic or a socio-psychologist or somebody, like that. It's just like, yeah, I don't have kids, but I study them from far away. I like that this advice from J.C. Ryle is a guy who's in the trenches of parenting, living it out himself. Between his ministry, his own family, his preaching, and his writing on children, it is evident that J.C. Ryle cared greatly for the souls of children. Before we listen to this young man's sermon, I'd just like to leave you this quote, which I thought was a really good one from him as well. Let us believe that they, children, think more and feel more and consider more than at first sight may appear, and that the Spirit is often working in them as really and truly as it is in older people. Above all, let us often name them before Christ in our prayers and ask him to take them under his special charge. He never changes. He is always the same. He cared for boys and girls when he was upon the earth. Let us not doubt that he cares for them at the right hand of the Father in heaven.
The two bears. He went up from thence unto Bethel, and as he was going by the way, there came forth little children out of the city, and mocked him, and said unto him, Go up, thou bald head, go up, thou bald head. And he turned back and looked on them, and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood, and bare 42 children of them. Dear children, did you ever see a bear? Perhaps not. There are no bears wild in this country now. There are some kept fastened up in wild beast shows, or carried about in cages, but there are none loose in the woods and fields. So perhaps you never saw a bear. A bear is a large, shaggy, savage, wild beast, with great teeth and claws, and very strong. It will kill sheep and lambs and calves and goats, and eat them. When it is very hungry, it will attack men, women, or children, and tear them to pieces. She-bears that have little cubs are particularly fierce and cruel. How thankful we ought to be that we can walk about in England without fear of being caught by a bear. Now I am going to tell you a story about a good man, 2 bears, and some children. It is a story out of the Bible, and so you may be sure that it is all true. Stories in other books are often only make-believe and tell us things that never really happened. Stories out of the Bible, you must always remember, are true, every word. Never forget that. Once on a time, about 2,700 years ago, there lived a good man whose name was Elisha. He was at first servant to a famous prophet of God named Elijah. After Elijah was taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire, Elisha was appointed to be prophet in his place. From that time to his death, he was a very great and very useful man. He did many miracles. He used to go up and down the land of Israel, teaching people how to serve God and reproving sinners. In some places, he kept up schools, called schools of the prophets. In this way, he became famous all over the country. All people knew Elisha, and all good people loved him. One day, not long after Elijah had been taken up to heaven, Elisha went to a place called Bethel, where there was a school. I dare say he went to see how the school was getting on, and whether it was doing any good. All schools need looking after and examining, and it does them good to be examined. It is only bad boys and girls who dislike being asked what they have learned. Now as this good old man, Elisha, got near Bethel, a very sad thing happened. A great number of little children came out of the town and behaved extremely ill. They began to mock Elisha and called him names, instead of respecting to him and bowing to him like good children. They made a game of him and said silly things. Go up, thou bald head, they cried. Go up, thou bald head. They called him bald head, I have no doubt, because the good prophet was bald with age, and had no hair on his head. They said, "Go up, I suspect," because his master Elijah had lately gone up to heaven, as everybody knew, and they meant that Elisha had better go away after his master and not trouble them any more with his teaching. It was as much as saying, "Be off and be gone. It is high time for you to go up as well as your master." Just think for a moment how wicked these children were. They lived in a town where they might have learned better things. There was a school of prophets at Bethel, but I am afraid they had not used their opportunities, and had loved play better than lessons. They had no business to mock at Elisha, and treat him so badly. He had done them no harm, and had never been unkind to them. He was a good man, and one who was their best friend. Above all, they ought not to have said, "Go up and get away." They ought rather to have said, "Stay with us, and teach us the way to heaven." Truly it is sad to see what lengths of wickedness even little children may go. It is sad to see how corrupt boys and girls may become, and what naughty things they will say, even when they live close to a school. But what did Elisha do when these children behaved so ill? We are told that he turned back and looked on them with sorrow and displeasure. They probably had often done the same thing before. It had become a habit with them, which could not be cured. The time had come when they must be punished, and then we are told that he cursed them in the name of the Lord. That does not mean, you may be sure, that Elisha flew into a passion and swore at the children as some bad old men might have done. He was not the man to do that. It only means that he solemnly pronounced God's anger and displeasure against them. He gravely told them, in the name of the Lord, that God would certainly punish them, and that was his duty as God's servant to say no indeed. Elisha did not speak in passion or ill temper. The judge at the assize is not angry with the prisoner when he sentences him to be put in prison. When Elisha pronounced God's curse on these wicked children, he did it as God's appointed servant, firmly and faithfully, but in sorrow. God told him no doubt, what to do, and like an obedient servant, he did it. What happened as soon as Elisha had spoken? At once there came forth out of a wood close by 2 she-bears, which rushed upon these wicked children, tearing and killing all they caught. Think what an awful surprise that must have been, how dreadfully frightened these children must have felt, what running and screaming and tumbling over one another and crying for help there must have been, how sorry and ashamed of themselves they must have felt. But with many it was too late. Before they could get within the walls of Bethel, the 2 bears had caught them and killed no less than 42 little children. 42 little boys and girls that night never came home to Bethel alive. 42 little suppers were not eaten. 42 little beds were not slept in. 42 little funerals took place next day. Many children, I cannot help hoping, got home safe and were not hurt, but I am sure they would never forget what they had seen. They would remember the 2 bears as long as they lived. Now, dear children, this is a sad story, but it is a very useful and instructive one. Like everything else in the Bible, it was written for your good. It teaches lessons which boys and girls ought never to forget. Let me tell you what the lessons are. Number 1, learn for one thing that God takes notice of what children do. He took notice of the little children at Bethel and punished them for their wickedness. Remember, I beg of you, that God is not altered. He is still the same. He is every day taking notice of you. I believe some people fancy that it does not matter how children behave, because God only notices grown-up men and women. This is a very great mistake. The eyes of God are upon boys and girls, and he marks all they do. When they do right, he is pleased, and when they do wrong, he is displeased. Dear children, never forget this. Let no one make you think that you are too young to serve God, and that you may safely wait till you are men and women. This is not true. It is not too soon to take up religion. As soon as you know right from wrong, you are old enough to begin taking the right way. As soon as you are old enough to be punished for doing wrong, you are old enough to give your heart to God and to follow Christ. The child that is old enough to be chastised for swearing and telling lies is not too young to be taught to pray and read the Bible. The child that is big enough to displease God is also big enough to please him. The child that is old enough to be tempted by the devil is not too young to have the grace of the Holy Spirit in his heart. Children, however little and young you are, God is always noticing you. He notices how you behave at home, how you behave at school, and how you behave at play. He notices whether you say your prayers or not, and how you say them. He notices whether you mind what your mother tells you, and how you go on when out of your mother's sight. He notices whether you are greedy, or selfish, or cross, or tell lies, or take what is not your own. In short, there is nothing about children that God does not notice. I read in the Bible that when little Ishmael was dead, almost dead, with thirst in the wilderness, God heard the voice of the lad. Mark that, he listened to the child's prayer. I read that when Samuel was only a little boy, God spoke to him. I read that when Abijah, the child of Jeroboam, was sick and dying, God said by the mouth of his prophet, "There is some good thing found in him, toward the Lord God of Israel." Children, these things were written for your learning. Now I'll give you a piece of advice. Say to yourselves every morning when you get up, God sees me. Let me live as in God's sight. God is always looking at what you do and hearing what you say. All is put down in his great books, and all must be reckoned for at the last day. It is written in the Bible, even a child is known by his doings. Learn, for another thing, that it is very wrong to mock at good people and despise religion. The little children of Bethel mocked at Elisha and called him bald-head. For so doing, they were terribly punished. Dear children, as long as you live, make it a rule never to laugh at religion or to mock anybody who is religious. This is one of the wickedest things you can do. It is pleasant to see boys and girls merry and happy. Youth is the time for laughter and merriment. But take care never to laugh at anything belonging to God. Whatever you laugh at, do not laugh at religion. Some boys and girls, I'm sorry to say, are very thoughtless about this. They think it clever to make a game of those who read their Bibles and say their prayers, and keep their Sundays properly, and attend to what is said at church. They laugh at other boys and girls who mind what their mothers say, and try to corrupt them. Some, indeed, are so wicked that when they see children trying to do what pleases God, they will point their fingers at them and cry, "There goes a little saint." Now all this is very wrong and offends God exceedingly. There sits one in heaven who sees these wicked children, and when he sees them, he is greatly displeased. We cannot wonder if such children come to trouble or turn out badly. All who despise God's people despise God himself. It is written, "Them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed." I read in the Bible that Ishmael was turned out of Abraham's house because he mocked his little brother Isaac. St. Paul tells us about this, that he persecuted him. At the time when Ishmael did this, he was only a boy, but boy as he was old enough to offend God by mocking, to bring himself and his mother into great trouble. Dear children, some of you perhaps have good fathers and mothers who tell you to read your Bibles and say your prayers. I hope that you never laugh at them behind their backs and mock at what they tell you about religion. Be sure, if you do this, that you commit a great sin. It is written, "The eye that mocketh at his father and despiseth to obey his mother, the ravens of the valley shall pick out, and the young eagles shall eat it." 3. Learn in the last place that sin is sure to bring sorrow at last. It brought wounds and death on the little children of Bethel. It brought weeping and crying to the homes of their parents. If these wicked boys and girls had not displeased God, they would have not been torn by the bears. Dear children, as long as you live, you will always see the same thing. Those who will have their own way and run into sin are sure sooner or later to find themselves in trouble. This trouble may not come at once. It may even be kept off for many long years. But sooner or later it is sure to come. There is a dreadful hell at last, and those who will go on sowing sin are sure to at last to reap sorrow. Adam and Eve would eat the forbidden fruit in Eden. And what was the consequence? Sorrow. They were cast out of the garden with shame. The people before the flood would go on eating and drinking and despising Noah's advice about the flood. And what was the consequence? Sorrow. The flood came and they were all drowned. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah would go on sinning in spite of Lot's warnings. And what was the consequence? Sorrow. The fire fell from heaven, and they were all burned. Esau would have the mess of pottage, and he despised his birthright. And what was the consequence? Sorrow. He sought it afterwards too late with many tears. The children of Israel would not obey God's command and go up into the land of Canaan when he commanded them. And what was the consequence? Sorrow. They wandered 40 years in the wilderness. Achan, when Jericho was taken, would not obey the command of Joshua, but took money and hid it under his tent. And what was the consequence? Sorrow. He was found out and publicly stoned. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 apostles, would not give his whole heart to Christ, but coveted money and betrayed his master. And what was the consequence? Sorrow. The money did him no good and did not make him happy, and he hanged himself. Ananias and Sapphira told a great lie to Peter and the apostles in order to be thought good and yet keep hold of the riches at the same time. And what was the consequence? Sorrow. They were both struck dead in one day. Dear children, remember these things to the end of your lives. The wages of sin is death. The fruit of sin at last is trouble. Those who tell lies or steal or get drunk or break the Sabbath may not suffer for it at first, but their sin will find them out sooner or later. In this world or the next, those that sow sin, like the children of Bethel, are sure to reap sorrow. The way of transgressors is hard, and now I will finish all I have been saying with 3 parting counsels. Consider them well and lay them to heart. Number 1, in the first place, settle in your minds that the way to be happy is to be really good in the sight of God. If you will have your own way and follow sin, you are sure to have trouble and sorrow. In the second place, if you want to be really good, ask the Lord Jesus Christ to make you good and to put His Spirit into your hearts. You cannot make yourselves good. I know your hearts are too weak, and the world and the devil are too strong. But Jesus Christ can make you good. and is ready and willing to do so. He can give you new hearts and power to overcome sin. Then take Jesus Christ for your shepherd and friend. Cast your souls upon him. Jesus, who died on the cross to save us, has a special care for little children. He says, I love them that love me, and them that seek me early shall find me. Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of God. In the last place, if you want to be kept from evil that is in the world, remember daily that God sees you, and live as in God's sight. Never mock at good people or make a game of religion. Love those most who love God most, and choose for friends those who are God's friends. Hate sin of all sorts. When sinners entice you, do not consent. Abhor that which is evil. Cleave to which is good. Dear children, if you live in this way, God will bless you, and you will be and you will find at last that you have chosen the good part, which cannot be taken from you. Remember these things, and you will have learned something from the two bears.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Revived Thoughts, and a big thanks to Mordechai for narrating today's episode. Again, a first in Revived Thoughts history.
Yeah, that's true. This is the very first that we've ever had a children's sermon. I think it's the first children's sermon we've ever had, and the first children's sermon ever delivered by a young man. So we really appreciate that. I don't have anything special to add to this episode. I feel like this is just a wonderful special episode from top to bottom. We're feeling really grateful. Thank you, Mordechai. And I only ask that as you walk away from the sermon, just like JC Ryle, just like the kind of theme of this episode, young people, if you can think of people in your life, young people that could use your prayer, ministries that you could be a part of, maybe you already are, and that's fantastic, but what can you do to pour into the lives of those who are young? That's just kind of, before I ask you to hit a like or share us out there, I this week just spend some time thinking about what can you do to prolong that, because I just think that it can so often be an overlooked part of what we do. We can be chasing other things, but it is certainly, it's going to matter a lot more than so much else we do. When we are long gone, the young people that we mentored and discipled and we poured into will probably still be here. This is Troy and Joel, and this is Revive Thoughts.